Good afternoon, everyone. We'll get started right now. I'm Chris Cain, the Executive Director at CPWR, the Center for Construction Research and Training, and I'd like to welcome you to the third webinar in our Women in Construction series, How to Be an Ally, Improving the Treatment of Women on the Job. And now I'm excited to introduce our panelists. Today we have Esmeralda Aguilar, partner at Sherman, Dunn, PC, a labor and employment law firm that works directly with NABTU. Vicki O'Leary, General Organizer and Director of Diversity for the International Association of Bridge, Structural, Ornamental, and Reinforcing Iron Workers, and Chair of NABTU's Tradeswomen Committee. Karen Dove, Executive Director of ANEW, an organization dedicated to improving the access and advancement of women in non-traditional career pathways such as construction and manufacturing. And Rosa Greenberg, Research Analysts with the Research to Practice program here at CPWR. Thank you all for taking time out of your schedules today. And with that, Esmeralda, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you. So at the federal, state, and local level, we have a collection of laws that make it unlawful to discriminate in the workplace. And in the interest of time, I'm going to focus primarily on federal, specifically Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Title VII prohibits discrimination at the workplace based on race, color, national origin, sex, and religion. In addition to protecting employees, the law protects job applicants and employees who have been fired or suspended. But keep in mind that with respect to private sector employers, Title VII only applies to employers with 15 or more employees. Please note, however, that the state and local anti-discrimination laws in your region may still apply even where Title VII does not. This is because some state and local laws do not have the 15 employee threshold for application. Over the past 50 years, 4 theories of employment discrimination have emerged under Title VII. And many of these theories have been adopted by the states: disparate treatment, disparate impact, harassment, and retaliation. So I'm sure this is not news to any of you, but we have a long way to go with respect to harassment and discrimination in the workplace. And not just in the construction industry. I'm talking about as a nation in general. To put things into perspective, sexual harassment was not even recognized as an actionable form of discrimination until 1986. Think about what that means. Many of us on this webinar today were born into a system that did not recognize sexual harassment as unlawful. Now, some of you may be wondering, well, wasn't Title VII passed in the 60s? Didn't that law prohibit sexual harassment? The answer is yes, Title VII was enacted by Congress in the 60s, but the courts were very slow in interpreting the law's prohibition on sex-based discrimination. This is because when passing Title VII, Congress added sex as a protected class at the very last minute. And so there is very little legislative history on what it means to discriminate against someone based on sex. Without clear congressional intent, the courts were very reluctant to push the envelope. So although Title VII has been in the books since 1964, it wasn't until 20 years later that the Supreme Court finally recognized sexual harassment as an unlawful form of discrimination. And the landmark case I am alluding to here is Meritor Savings Bank versus Michelle Vinson. That case involved Michelle Vinson, a 19-year-old bank teller in Washington, D.C. Michelle's supervisor, a married man with 7 children, had for 3 years consistently abused her verbally and physically, including sexual assault. He would put his hands on Michelle, barge into the ladies' rooms, make lewd comments and gestures, look at pornographic material in her presence and in the presence of other female employees. So Michelle sued. She sued her employer, the bank, and her supervisor. During the course of litigation, the bank, her employer, argued that Michelle had no right to sue under Title VII because she had suffered no economic injury. In other words, the bank claimed that no one had ever threatened Michelle to fire her or demote her for refusing sexual advantages. The bank's position was that psychological injury, psychological abuse at the workplace does not trigger Title VII protections. Fortunately, the Supreme Court rejected the bank's arguments, and in a unanimous decision, the court in Moderator held that there are two forms of sexual harassment claims under Title VII. The first is harassment that results in an economic injury. This claim is often referred to as quid pro quo, or this for that. One example would be an employee who is denied a pay increase or who is demoted for refusing to provide the manager with sexual favors. For purposes of quid pro quo harassment claims, the perpetrator must be someone with authority, someone with the ability to tangibly alter your terms and conditions of employment. The second form of harassment is the harassment that Michelle experienced. This type of claim is referred to as hostile work environment. A hostile work environment is created when the harassing conduct is so toxic, so frequent, that it interferes with the employee's ability to perform his or her job. This category of harassment is not concerned with economic injury. Instead, it focuses on the individual's psychological well-being. Unlike quid pro quo, this second form of harassment can be perpetrated by anyone in the work environment, including a peer, a colleague, a supervisor, a vendor, or the employer's customers, for example. So how exactly do courts define hostile work environment under Title VII? The courts and the EEOC have held that speech or conduct must be so severe or pervasive that it creates an intimidating or demeaning environment. The key words here are severe or pervasive. So to prevail with this type of claim, an aggrieved worker must show that the conduct or speech is toxic, that it is ongoing and continuous. So repeated sexual jokes or comments, repeated requests for dates, repeated offensive or unwelcoming touching. Under the severe or pervasive standard, a single comment or occurrence may not be severe enough. And I don't want to sugarcoat this. This standard, the severe and pervasive standard, is a difficult one to meet, which means that a lot of abusive and demeaning workplace behavior goes unpunished by the courts. And I will give you just one recent example. The lamentable decision in Swire versus Fair Foods out of the Seventh Circuit. The plaintiff in that case, Amy Swire, was hired as a sales rep by defendant Fair Foods Corporation. During a business trip, a male colleague asked Amy to dinner, followed Amy into her room, got into her bed, and said he wanted a cuddle buddy. He touched Amy's arms and lower back and asked Amy to go skinny dipping with him. Amy reported the harassment to her employer and was fired a month later. The employer claimed that she was terminated due to poor work performance. In a decision penned by Judge Bauer, the court concluded that there was no sexual harassment because the unwelcome comments and advances had occurred only once, and therefore it was not sufficiently severe or pervasive. Adding insult to injury, Judge Bauer called on employees to have thick skin. He also noted that other crude, unwelcome behaviors, such as groping and kissing, may not be enough to establish a harassment claim. Fortunately, states such as New York, California, Maryland, and the District of Columbia have passed their own anti-discrimination laws with less stringent standards for proving a hostile work environment. These states have expressly rejected the notion of severe and pervasive, which means that aggrieved workers in those jurisdictions will have an easier time than Amy, in showing a hostile work environment. In addition to anti-discrimination laws, states are also paving the way for anti-bullying laws. Bullying is generally defined as unwelcome, abusive behavior that is not tied to protected categories such as race or sex. In recent years, legislatures in 31 states have introduced workplace anti-bullying bills. To date, Tennessee has passed such a law, and California and Utah have passed laws requiring employers to provide anti-bullying training to their supervisors. And if you would like to learn more about your jurisdiction's anti-discrimination laws and related efforts, I strongly encourage you to go to this website, National Women's Law Center, and they list all of the anti-discrimination laws in each of the states and related efforts. So earlier I told you that there are 4 categories of discrimination. So we've gone over harassment, so let's quickly touch on 1, 2, and 4 on this slide. Disparate treatment. Disparate treatment is the most obvious form of discrimination. It occurs when an employer intentionally takes an employee's protective status into consideration when taking an adverse employment action, such as termination or layoff. An example of an intentional discrimination is an employer that learns of an employee's pregnancy and, based on that knowledge, selects the pregnant employee for layoff rather than the less qualified employee who is not pregnant. Disparate impact refers to a more subtle form of discrimination. It occurs when an employer adopts a policy that seems neutral on its face, but has a disproportionately negative impact on members of a protected class. So, employer policies that have been found to have a disparate impact on protected groups include minimum height requirements because they disproportionately affect women, Latinos, and Asians. Physical agility tests also have a disparate impact on women. To defeat such claims, an employer must show that these requirements are in fact job-related and a legitimate business necessity. So finally, I'd like to wrap up by going over the complaint process under Title VII. But first and foremost, if your employer has an internal complaint procedure, aggrieved workers should use that procedure. Why? Because it makes you visible, and visibility offers a degree of protection against retaliation. Also, if you complain to your employer and they do nothing, you've now strengthened your claim against that employer. Now, with respect to the EEOC, please keep in mind that you cannot file a lawsuit without first going through the EEOC complaint process. The EEOC requires that you file your complaint with the agency within 180 days of the alleged discrimination or harassment. The EEOC then investigates the complaint. On average, investigations take 10 months to complete. If 6 months have passed since you've filed your complaint and EEOC has not yet completed its investigation, you can request that the agency give you what it calls a notice of right to sue. This is a letter from EEOC giving you permission to file a lawsuit before their investigation is complete. If you allow EEOC to complete its investigation, however long that may take, and the agency finds merit in your complaint, one of 3 things will happen. The agency will work with you and the employer on a resolution. This process is known as conciliation. Or the agency will sue on your behalf. This is very rare. It occurs in less than 8% of all cases, so I wouldn't bet on number 2. The third thing that might happen is that the agency will close the case and permit the employee to file a lawsuit on their own. Again, the employee must do so within 90 days after receiving this notice. And that's the complaint process in a nutshell. I'll stop here and turn the virtual floor over to Vicki O'Leary.
Thank you, Esmeralda. Some really great stuff there. So I'm going to talk about our Be That One Guy program that's within the Ironworkers. And we always tie back, what does diversity have to do with safety and how it impacts your your work environment. So with that, we know that harassment affects more than just the victim, and it has a dangerous domino effect on the job site. It isn't just the person that's being harassed that's at risk. We know that the harasser is focusing on their target, and the person that's being harassed, the victim, is focusing on what's coming next, worried about what's coming next. And then you've got witnesses that are seeing all of this, and they're focusing their attention on what's going on, and it's distracting, and it can actually be upsetting to be watching these events. But the outcome of that is that safety is compromised, and now you've got a whole group of workers who don't have their full attention on what they're doing, and in ironwork, that lack of focus could actually have deadly consequences. So what is our bystanders' response to situations? We call it lead by example. So the L is learn what it means to be inclusive. The E is educate yourself and your coworkers. The A is adopt behavior for yourself. And D is defend for your coworkers from microaggressions and harassment on the job by using the 3 Ds: direct, distract, and delegate. So what do we mean by that? I'm going to go into that. Wow, that just went crazy, didn't it? Sorry, guys. There we go. So the 5 steps to becoming an upstander. We want you to model of bystander interventions is 1, recognize the situation as a problem and understand that the problem is urgent and it requires action. And the 3rd is to take responsibility for your own authority to intervene. And then 4, you have to decide how best to act. And the 5th is to choose to act, because that is a choice. So recognizing that inappropriate behavior, what are the red flags? Well, we know unsolicited and unwelcome physical contact is one of them, but we call the big 5 anything that involves jokes about sexual orientation, gender, religion, age, or ethnicity, and then negative or aggressive behavior towards a specific person or group, and belittling or threatening behavior. And quite frankly, if you feel uncomfortable, we know that the targeted individual most likely does as well. So how do we do this? We're asking you not to be a bystander, to step in and step up. We really believe that workplace safety is everyone's business. In the ironworkers, we have a saying, see something, say something. And this just is another example of how safety and this go hand in hand. So what are the 4 Ds? The first one is direct. So respond directly to that person, physically intervene if necessary. And I don't mean physically as in getting into a brawl with this person. I mean stepping forward, stepping closer so that you can actually hear what's going on and try to calm that situation down. We want you to be confident, assertive, and calm. So how do you do that? Well, when you step up and step in, you can say, hey, is everything okay here? Or, wow, that joke definitely felt inappropriate. That's not cool. Or, hey, let's keep it professional. Or, come on, we're all part of the same union family. Let's be respectful of everyone. Then the next one is by distraction. It could be a question or a conversation that's not related to what's going on in the situation at all. What you're trying to do is de-escalate that situation. So how do you do that? So by stepping up, you could say, hey, the boss told me to get you. He needs you now, whether he actually does or not. What you're doing is de-escalating that situation. Or I need to talk to you about something. Or, hey, can you come here for a second? Or can you help me with this, please? Or, hey, go to the job shack. The foreman's calling you. Again, this is to distract, change the tone, change everything that's going around. We know that, at least in my industry, the men that I've worked with, 90 to 95% have been really great guys. Maybe this person is going through a divorce and just having a really bad day. What we also want to do is to keep them from getting into that illegal harassment that Esmeralda was talking about earlier. So we just want to tone everything down. The last is delegate. So not everybody handles things in the same way. And I can tell you that back in my apprenticeship, I would have certainly maybe done distracting, but most likely would have done the delegate. Definitely not an in-your-face kind of person then. I would definitely do that now. But if you're delegating, you're going to go enlist the help of others to come help with that situation. So part of that is to bring it to their attention. So walk over to your foreman and say, hey, I think Sue's uncomfortable. Will you help me step in? Or Tell the foreman, the job steward, or even friends of the targeted individual that something's going down and that they need help. Or contact your local union or employer leadership, or even myself in the diversity department at the Ironworkers. So then the last one, which we added later, but delayed. If you can't intervene in the moment, check in with the person that's being harassed to let them know that they're not alone. Maybe you were up bolting up and you saw it going down, but there was nothing you could do in that circumstance because it was down below you. But you could always go back to them and say, hey, are you okay? Or is there someone I can call for you? Or do you want to get a cup of coffee and talk? Or I can go with you to the job steward, HR, business manager, etc. if you want to report it, just showing that you care. So what are the do's and don'ts of intervention? Well, we do want you to move closer to the person being harassed. And if it's safe, we want you to create a distance put yourself between the person and the aggressor. And we want you to take cues from the person being harassed. Take notice if they're engaging and they're dealing with the situation. You can still step forward, but maybe you don't need to do anything, but just respect and follow their lead. And be safe. Assess your surroundings. And is there anyone that you can ask for help? And these are the don'ts. Don't call the police unless the person being harassed asks you to, or that the situation has escalated out of control and you need the police. Don't escalate the situation. Focus on respect and professionalism as opposed to negative behavior. And last, don't do nothing. Silence is dangerous. And it also communicates that you're accepting this, and it plays right into the bully's hands. So if you're too nervous or afraid to step in or step up, then at least stand your ground. And with that, I'm going to pass this on to Karen Dove.
Thank you so much, Vicki. So it's a pleasure to be presenting today with this great group of panelists. My name's Karen Dove. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit organization based in Seattle, Washington called ANEW. And we've been around since 1980 with a mission to increase the number of women in BIPOC in construction apprenticeship programs. And while we're seeing a huge increase in the number of women entering construction apprenticeships, in fact, here it's over 20% of the apprentices entering, the number completing continues to be less than their white male counterparts. Even then, the overall completion rate of apprentices is only about 40%, and apprenticeship isn't a cheap investment. So we really want our graduates to succeed in the industry, and we need to provide retention services. We had support service funding, mentorship opportunities, but really the one thing that wasn't being addressed was the real systemic problem, the culture of the construction industry. So ANEW created the Rise Up program, Respect, Inclusion, Safety, and Equity in the Construction Trades. And it is a respectful workplace campaign designed to change the culture of construction to one more inclusive to all people. So let's talk about the status quo culture of the industry. When you're talking about changing the status quo, this industry has been this way for a long time. And when you're changing status quo, it takes a huge shift. We've got lots of studies showing the amount of harassment, discrimination that has been happening. Portland State University, 60% of apprentices reported harassment, discrimination. In a 2018 survey of women in the construction industry, 66% of respondents reported they have faced sexual harassment. In a UK study, construction was the second work business sector for both sexual harassment and non-sexual bullying, topped only by the military. And the local data here in Seattle wasn't much better. In 2019, we did an evaluation for one of our public entities, and 72% of the workers responded that they observed or heard at least one type of discrimination or harassment at their current job site. So think about status quo. Think about how other groups have changed the status quo. In the construction industry, safety didn't become a focus until there were consequences of not being safe. What about a campaign like Mothers Against Drunk Drivers? In 1980, the laws on drunk driving were way less severe, and there was way less stigma attached to it. It was almost non-existent until one mother started a movement to change the status quo. So that's what we're up against. We need to create a movement to create a respectful workplace culture in the industry. So how do we shift the status quo culture? Cultural competence requires sustained work over time. This is not a check the box process or a list of do's and don'ts. We all know one training doesn't change the culture. And in fact, one and done trainings can actually have a negative effect on the culture. So in order to create change, in order to change the status quo, you need repeated, consistent messaging. So the Rise Up program was created for tradespeople by tradespeople, and it was created methodically to include respectful workplace training within the current structure of the construction industry, worker orientation, during safety trainings, job box talks, posters, signage. You also have to make sure that the training is culturally relevant. So we base the Rise Up program on the construction values of safety and productivity. Everything ties back to that messaging. We believe you need training at all levels, from the newest apprentice to the superintendent and even the owners of the construction companies. One thing that we found when researching the needs was that the field supervisors felt they did not have enough training about how to identify and stop this type of behavior, how to do conflict resolution, how to give effective feedback. So we created a field supervisor training to address this specific need. And we even train our pre-apprenticeship students on how to advocate for themselves. Best practice cultural competency consists of 4 parts. First, you have to be aware of oneself, your own socialization, stereotypes, beliefs, and cultural norms. Then you have to have knowledge of experience and values that are different from yours. Then you can put in the skills, and lastly, action and advocacy. It's important to understand that cultivating self-awareness and knowledge of privilege, oppression, culture, and systems is an action step. If we try to jump into skills without first helping workers understand the problem and their role in it, they're likely to repeat or even worsen the problem. We are trying to change human behavior by changing people's perception and make those changes the new normal or the new status quo behavior. We also need policies and procedures and enforcement. So in the city of Seattle and this region, state of Washington, not just the city, we have program contract requirements for a lot of our public entities. And these are built in some cases, right into the contract, the public contract that the owner signs. And it insists on specific pieces, again, that methodically put in messaging, this respectful workplace messaging at different levels of getting onto the work site. So again, the worker orientation, field supervisor training, the job box talks, those are things that can be added easily into things you're already doing. And then best practices also say that you should have a reporting mechanism, and hopefully that reporting mechanism is not directly back just to somebody who is on the job site, but an off-site or third-party reporting mechanism. And then we've started Rise Up ambassadors, and these are people that are identified that someone can go to on the job site if they're having a problem. They know that person is safe, they know that person's been trained, they know that person can help them. And lastly, it's really critical to have enforcement. Just like Mothers Against Drunk Driving, it took them 20 years to get legislation passed, but there had to be enforcement and consequences for us to change that status quo behavior. And we believe that, or we base those on any of these actions, this harassment, hazing, or bullying. It's not based on the intent of the person, it's based on the impact. So this is some of the language that the city uses. It's really around what we heard earlier, whether a reasonable person would have known that this would cause a worker to be humiliated, intimidated, or otherwise treated in an inappropriate manner. But it is critical to have enforcement. And on our public works jobs here, if somebody is found to have done something, they will even ban them from job sites, not just that job site, but future projects for that entity. And there are tools on our website. One of them are the job box talks. You can actually download them. There's 12 of them. You can utilize them right now within your safety meetings. And those are located on the riseupforequity.org website. And I will turn it over to, can't remember who I'm turning it over to. Rosa.
Thanks, Karen. Hi, everybody. My name is Rosa Greenberg, and I am a research analyst with CPWR's Research to Practice Department. I'm going to wrap up by giving an overview of some key resources. First, I'm going to talk about resources that focus on gender-based violence, and then I'm going to move to other resources that CPWR provides that are focused on women and on mental health. So I'll start with some of the resources that are related to violence. These are resources that may be useful for people who are experiencing harassment at work, but also for their coworkers, their employers, their unions, and other actors. Direct support services are not only for people directly experiencing violence, but also for anyone who's affected by violence that takes place in the workplace, like someone who witnesses it, or is supporting a coworker, or is investigating claims of harassment, or is coordinating a program on these issues. Also, addressing these issues in the workplace can bring up memories for some people of past experiences, and resources are available for everyone. So first, employee assistance programs, or for union members, member assistance programs, can both provide resources and also help connect you to other resources. They may be able to provide assistance such as free counseling or other health services, and they might also be able to provide referrals to different community-based service providers. There's variation in what types of services and supports EAPs and MAPs offer. So it's good for you to consult yours to see what you might be able to be available for your specific program if you have one. So there are multiple free, anonymous, and confidential national hotlines that are available 24/7. The National Sexual Assault Hotline provides support for people who are experiencing violence. And it can also be used by people who are affected by violence, even if they're not the direct targets, like someone who has witnessed violence at work or someone whose coworker has disclosed violence to them. And this hotline can both provide support and connect users with resources like counseling and sexual health services and other service providers. In addition, the National Domestic Violence Hotline provides support for people experiencing domestic violence or anyone else who's affected by this type of violence, even if they're not experiencing it directly. This is a helpful hotline to be aware of because experiencing domestic violence can both affect a person at work and it can also affect the workplace broadly. Domestic violence can enter the workplace no matter where it occurs, and especially if a worker is experiencing stalking such that their partner might physically present at a work site, this is a helpful resource to be aware of. So RAIN, which is the organization that runs the National Sexual Assault Hotline, also maintains a database of local service providers. And this is a great resource for finding your local center if you're seeking services for yourself or for a coworker. Also, if you're an employer or a union, this database is also a great way to learn about organizations in your area and what support they can provide. And that's helpful because it increases your ability to refer employees or to members to local organizations with confidence about where you're telling them that they can get support. And some local service providers are also really open to building relationships with employers or with unions to best be able to serve their clients and connect them back to you in terms of resources you might be able to provide related to their workplace. So there are legal resources and some protections to also mention for people who've experienced violence at work, and I'm going to talk about a couple of key ones. First, the Time's Up Legal Defense Fund provides support for people who've experienced sexual harassment or retaliation at work. And they can also connect workers to attorneys for free consultations. And in some cases, they'll even provide assistance to pay legal fees and to pay costs. And also, this is a new state guide on employment rights for survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. And it can be useful for workers and employers and unions. And this new guide was created by Legal Momentum and Futures Without Violence and has state-by-state analysis of rights that are specific to each state. So these are some additional resources that come from Workplaces Respond to Domestic and Sexual Violence, which is the National Resource Center that is focused on the impacts of domestic violence, sexual harassment, and stalking on workplaces. This resource center is run by an organization called Futures Without Violence, and Workplaces Respond offers free tailored training and technical assistance to unions, to employers, and to others who reach out for support. And it provides a wide range of resources, some of which I'll highlight here. And the resources focus on how to help workplaces both prevent and respond to gender-based violence in ways that are trauma-informed and also center the expertise and the autonomy of people who've experienced violence. So trainings include content like a model training curriculum for unions on workplace gender-based violence that was developed through participatory input from shop stewards and local unions, a training video for supervisors on how they can make an impact, and an interactive tool where you can practice responding supportively to a virtual employee who is disclosing an experience. They also have a bunch of different tools. One is a guide about how trauma from gender-based violence affects labor organizations and how unions can integrate an understanding of trauma in their responses to workplace violence. Another is a rapid response toolkit for employers to prepare protocols for what to do, when an employee discloses violence that really goes above and beyond the legal obligations that an employer has, and uses a trauma-informed lens about how to focus on respect and autonomy for the person reporting. In addition, the Resource Center also provides a model workplace policy tool to help you draft policies that best support workers who are experiencing violence. And finally, the Resource Center also provides a range of fact sheets and guides, like one on statistics on prevalence and effects of workplace gender-based violence. Another guide to highlight here is a resource they have for coworkers about how to start and how to keep up a supportive conversation with a person who you think might be experiencing violence in your workplace. The website has a lot of other resources, so it's a great place to explore to find other tools for how to make your workplace or your union a safer place. I'm also going to share some information about resources on compassion fatigue. So compassion fatigue is a workplace hazard for people who are working closely with issues of workplace gender-based violence and doing direct support for people who are experiencing violence. And like other workplace hazards, there are lots of steps we can take to mitigate its risks and to support people who are affected by it. So here are some resources from ProQual, Professional Quality of Life. They have a set of evidence-based resources on core concepts like burnout, compassion fatigue, compassion satisfaction, and moral distress. And they also have some great support tools on topics like better sleep, boundaries, breathing, grounding techniques, mindfulness, progressive muscle relaxation, and visualizations. I will also flag on this slide and on this topic broadly that while compassion fatigue is a risk, compassion satisfaction can also be an effect for people who are working actively on these issues when they're supported at work and are able to have other protective factors. According to ProQual, compassion satisfaction is the positive consequences of helping behavior. It's the positive feelings you get from the ability to assist others and to make a contribution. And it can be protective in itself against burnout. So I'm going to wrap up with an overview of some of CPWR's resources that are focused on women in construction. First, we have a database of personal protective equipment options for women and non-binary people in construction, and it details brands and products that focus on fitting a wide range of anthropometry, and we update it regularly. We also have a YouTube playlist, I think that Jess sent out a link to in the chat earlier, that compiles each of the videos from our webinars for our Women in Construction series, and we will continue to add to this playlist to centralize a place where you can find videos on this topic. In addition, we are also working on a physician's alert for pregnant workers. And just like our other physician's alerts, this is a product that construction workers will be able to bring to their doctors to assist in care. And it focuses on pregnancy. It is designed to equip workers with information about their health and their rights at work while they're pregnant. And it also has information for physicians about construction workers' jobs, ways they can support workers during pregnancy, and resources for requesting accommodations and writing targeted accommodation letters to job duties when needed. In addition, our data center hosts a dashboard on data about women in construction. And like our other dashboards, it's interactive. So it is a great place to go to explore what particular data you're interested in for better understanding the status of women in the industry. Finally, we have some mental health resources. You could consult our Workplace Stress Toolbox talk and also check out our mental health resources page for additional content on workplace mental health. On our mental health page, you will find CPWR's new resilience training tool. It includes 9 activities that guide discussions with construction workers about substance use, suicide, mental and physical well-being. And these field-tested training activities are designed for groups of 8 to 10 apprentices or journey-level workers and can be completed in 30 minutes to an hour. The workbook includes detailed facilitation instructions and an introductory slide set. So thank you so much for attending today. I will pass things back to Chris.
Well, thank you, Rosa. That was wonderful. Now is the time for questions and answers. A few have come in the chat, and we have the ones from before. So if you have any questions, we may be able to get to them if you pop them in the chat or the Q&A right now. One of the questions that came in before was, the question is pretty broad. It's what more can the government do to assist women in the construction industry? And I want to throw that one at Karen and at Esmeralda as well.
Sure. I think there's a lot of good work being done right now. I do think that requiring respectful workplace training on jobs is something that more public entities or contractors should require. There's the CHIPS Act, the BEAD program, the Department of Transportation funding that's coming out. All of them have programs and policies to bring underrepresented workers into construction, including women. So there are quite a few different policies right now happening, and also community workforce agreements, project labor agreements can have goals to help address some of these inequities also.
So currently, a number of federal agencies are exploring ways in which they can use federal assistance programs to incentivize developers and project owners to think about and address childcare needs. The Department of Commerce is really paving the way in this regard. Last month, the agency announced that it will require certain applicants seeking federal funds for the construction of semiconductor facilities to provide a plan for access to childcare for construction workers and for the facility workers. Applicants can satisfy this requirement by developing plans for on and near site childcare. They can also provide childcare subsidies or other similar measures. To date, I think this is the most concrete step I've seen a federal agency take with respect to using its leverage to incentivize and really require childcare assistance.
I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. It'll be a good experiment to watch. This one for Vicki is, how can we help women believe that they belong on the job site? Our own internal voices are our worst enemies with external allies.
We belong there. There's just no question that we belong there. And quite frankly, when you look at the numbers, there's not enough white men to take care of all of these jobs that are going to be coming up. So we have to look at the other 51% of the population. So yeah, we belong there. I've been there for 38 years. We belong here.
Thanks, Vicki. Back to Esmeralda. It's like, here's one I think you could answer. How to handle, how I guess the question is, how do we handle legitimate complaints without being blackballed in the industry and still get the results needed?
So in my presentation, I talked about 4 theories of discrimination. The 4th theory is retaliation. Title VII and most every state anti-discrimination law prohibits retaliation by the employer. And so I think that, using those provisions when we experience blackballing as a result of, us speaking out with respect to Title VII violations or any violation of a anti-discrimination law. But also, again, I would emphasize that to the extent that an employer has an internal complaint process, it's really important that we avail ourselves of that process, because that's really how we, draw attention to the concern. And, if the employer ignores our complaints, well, that just helps us, right? That just helps strengthen our claim that the employer is turning a blind eye and should be taken to task for that by either the EEOC or the courts.
Thanks, Esmeralda. I think maybe, Rosa, you covered a little bit of this, but how do you deal with advocacy fatigue, and where do you find the energy to continually do this type of work, educating those who need it? I'm not sure if Rosa is the right person to answer it, but I'll just throw that out there.
Well, I'd love to hear from other folks about their experiences of how they've kept going through all of the work that they've done in this field. I'll just, again, plug those resources from ProQual and just continued validation that advocacy fatigue is really real and compassion fatigue is really real. And it's a recognized hazard across a lot of different workplaces. And it's something that there are a lot of resources coming out about, specifically often targeted around healthcare workers, or counselors, but a lot of it is really applicable to people who are working directly on these issues in other fields. And the Department of Justice also has a great toolkit on vicarious trauma that can also be helpful for this on a systems level for helping to reduce the likelihood of advocacy or compassion fatigue.
Did anyone else want to say anything?
I would just say that we don't do a great job sometimes of celebrating the wins that we do have, and celebrating those wins is critical to continue to have energy to keep fighting sometimes.
I'd
Any
like
comment?
Yeah,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
I'd like to just jump in on that. And Karen and I have worked closely together on a few things. And I think that having friends that are in the industry doing the same thing. And I know that for a while there, we were having our Friday once a month time together, which was really quite helpful in just giving you that stamina, that energy that you need to keep moving forward. It can take a toll, but I do think having others that are doing the same work and being connected with them really helps with that as well. So thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
And that's actually echoed by a comment that just came in from a person named Kelly, who said, typically I get re-energized by other women who inspire me. We are all in this together. Lift your sisters up. Back to Karen on another question that came in during the presentation, but before you highlighted it, the question was, are there field handouts or resources that a supervisor can use? And then you did show up, you did flash up a few of the resources. Can you describe those a little bit from your organization? And I don't know if Jess can put the link in the chat again.
Yeah, on the Rise Up, the number 4 equity.org, riseupforequity.org, there are some tools. There's job box talks that have posters and instructor guides. They're very easy to follow, easy for people to follow along with and do at a safety meeting or safety training. And then there's other trainings there that we offer. So if there's any interest in providing those trainings, just get in touch with me. I'll put my email in the chat.
Great. And then there's a couple along the same lines that one came in during the chat and one came in before. After a conflict or an issue, how do you get things back to normal so they aren't awkward? And what do you do if a manager shows anger towards you, but not to the men on the crew, that type of thing? Any points of advice for these kind of questions is how to avoid awkwardness or being singled out?
We are always going to stand out because we're generally one of only a few that are on the job. The more women that we get on the job, the more people of color that we get on the job, we're not going to stand out as much. So there's strength in numbers. So my thing is that the more women we get, the safer we're going to be. The more people of color they get, the safer they're going to be. And there won't be that awkwardness anymore because it's just going to be normal. So I think with all the work that we have coming and all the people that we're going to have to hire to coming into construction, that's going to change the face of construction, and we're all going to be safer because of that.
Yeah.
Great. One other question came in about retention efforts and programs. Have there been any retention efforts / programs that seem to work or are considered best practices for women in this industry? And I think we focused a little bit on that with Karen and some of what you talked about in Vicki's Be That Guy program. Did you guys want to add anything to that? Also, I'm just flagging it because we have covered that in previous webinars too in our women's series. But Karen, did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, we're typically serving people who don't have connections to the construction industry, right? They don't have their brother, uncle, dad in the construction industry that they can go to. So creating a social network for them to be able to have those connections is really critical. Financial support services in some cases, if they get laid off, they're trying to get back to work, they need dues paid, like there's a lot of different things that happen. And then really also giving them some of those work skills to ensure that they're showing up on time and doing what needs to be done to stand out so that they aren't laid off as often. Because if they're laid off for too long, we can lose them in that period of time. So helping them connect to those resources and jobs has been very helpful for our graduates.
And I'd like to just add that Karen and I worked on the Tradeswomen Build Nations conference back in 2018, I believe. And that is just something that invigorates you and kind of holds you over until the following year. So I think that during the pandemic, we kind of lost momentum because we were doing it virtually. And I think that we lost a lot of women during the pandemic because they had to stay home with their kids. But seeing the response this year at Tradeswomen Build Nations at 3,300 women, it's incredible. And then we also have to talk about the Lean In Circles that the Sheryl Sandberg Foundation and NABTU have put together with curriculum that is tradeswomen centric and allows them to meet. They meet as a cohort, they meet monthly for a year. So just broadening their circles. And it's not just that. I mean, when we look at all of the groups that we have on Facebook that are private for tradeswomen to meet and to mentor each other in a very unprofessional manner, but nonetheless, they're still getting that sort of mentorship that they need. We had a woman that had gone through the pre-apprenticeship for the ironworkers in Benicia, California. She did great because she started in the spring, worked through the summer. Now Chicago hits and it's cold. And she's like, I don't know how to dress. And our Canadian sisters jumped on there and were telling her exactly what she needed to buy. Here's the clothes you need. So just having other friends that are in the trades. And I don't think women really care what trade it is. They see a sister, it's a sister. So I think that too, with the socializing with and being around other tradeswomen is certainly a big help in retention.
Great. One that just came in through the chat is Spanish language resources or experiences to share. I'm not sure.
The ironworkers do have all of their curriculum in Spanish for the apprenticeship, which I think is quite helpful. And all of our journeyman upgrades are also in Spanish. I think that's important, but it takes a while to get all of that done and get it rolled out.
Great. Rosa?
Oh, I was just going to jump in that CPWR's Toolbox Talk that I referenced is available in Spanish. And also the resources from Workplaces Respond, the National Resource Center, those are mostly available in Spanish. There's a Spanish version of the page if you go to the workplacesrespond.org homepage. And the ProQual resources are all available both in Spanish and a set of additional languages in addition to English and Spanish.
Great. And that is, other than some really positive comments coming in through the chat, that's we've gotten through our questions and we're just shy of the top of the hour. So with that, I wanted to really thank Jessica for hosting and pulling this together for us, the series together for us. You've done a phenomenal job, as well as our panelists today. Thank you all very much. We appreciate your time. We know it's valuable. And I hope you and all the participants in today's webinar have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everybody.